Hello, poetry lovers. Today's video shows the creation of a new piece that's part of an ongoing series I'm writing. It's titled, Things to Teach My Daughter About Hope. Stick around to the end of the video to see the complete first draft of this new poem. So the first piece I wrote for this series was titled, Things to Teach My Daughter About Anger. And that piece was really written in the heat of a moment as I was processing some very strong feelings. I've included a link to that piece in the description below. But that piece gave rise to the idea of doing a whole series about things I plan to teach my daughter. Because these poems represent actual thoughts I want to convey to her, I chose free verse for the form. I want it to feel conversational, so I'm using lines of moderate length and lots of enjambment. Enjambment means when you put a line break in the middle of a sentence and you have no punctuation at the end of the line. I want the line breaks to help visually emphasize moments of importance in the poem, but not to kind of stack on top of punctuation to create very substantial moments of pause. This allows the moments where I do end lines with punctuation, that is, I have end-stopped lines, to have significantly more impact and create a break almost as weighty as a stanza break without dividing the poem into stanzas. So these two lines include two of only 4 end-stopped lines in the poem, and I reserved these first 2 end stops for a moment of extreme challenge in the emotional journey of the poem. I found that it's so important to couch deeply personal, emotional topics like this in very concrete physical details to avoid the poem becoming maudlin or saccharine, so I surrounded the emotional or theoretical claim within 2 very specific concrete details. The choice to use end-stopped lines here is an attempt to support the emotional extremes I'm shifting between by allowing a moment for the reader to pause in between them. In the last half of the poem, I used some slightly longer lines contrasted with some slightly shorter lines, often with a lot of repetition in those lines. Combining a brief line, repetition, and end stops helps to slow the poem down as it's moving toward a close and to create a visual and verbal representation of the sense of hesitancy implied here. This is one of the most important strategies to master when you're writing poetry seriously. The use of form to both visually and verbally create the emotional or psychological content you want the reader to experience. I'm not saying I've mastered this at all, but for a true master of this technique, you can check out Renaissance poet George Herbert. I've included some links below. I knew I wanted the last line of this piece to create a bit of surprise, or certainly a turn from the beginning, and I intentionally made it the shortest sentence in the poem at just 7 letters long. I emphasized the short length by putting it alone on a line, and you might have noticed it's the second of only 2 sentences that comprise a full line of the poem on its own, along with the thematic statement I mentioned earlier. I used this structure to help encourage a comparison with that thematic statement, as well as with the opening line of the poem. There are some weaknesses here, I think, especially with the similes in the first half of the poem. But on the whole, I'm liking the progression of this piece, and I think it will fit well in the series I'm working on. I certainly think it meshes well and provides an interesting counterpoint to the thematic concepts I explored in the first poem I wrote for this series. So here it is, a first draft of Things to Teach My Daughter About Hope, written in about 16 minutes on November 8th, 2021. Things to Teach My Daughter About Hope. Only a fool would keep giving home space to hope, and I'm no fool. I've felt the keen agony of her blade next my spine too many times. Case in point, a home pregnancy test that gushed a pink positive, a blood HCG that started strong and rose sharp as an alpine slope, a body performing every early pregnancy sign like it was running out of time, a silent ultrasound, no heartbeat. Hope humiliates us all. Said daughter said her first hello, sticky eyes unfurling, hopelessly small hands grasping breast, just 14 months later. Post 3 terrified trimesters, certain she'd go the way of the last 3. Every glimpse, sense, sound of her like a distant voice saying, wait. Just wait. I waited in fear and trembling to lose her who tonight I laid sleeping in her crib the 400th time. In agony, I kept the crib and waited. So, the lesson? Be a fool. Thanks for watching this episode of Ars Poeticat. If you enjoyed watching poetry happen, please like and subscribe. Then, go make some art.